The week after I buried my wife, my son-in-law threw a pool party at her lake house. He did not invite me, he did not call, he did not ask. I found out from a neighbor who sent me a blurry photo, a photo of 40 strangers drinking on the dock my wife and I had built together the summer before her diagnosis. I sat in my truck in that neighbor's driveway for a long time staring at that picture. My wife had been in the ground for 11 days. 11 days. And the man my daughter had married was already using her most treasured place on earth like it was a hotel he had inherited by right. That was the moment I stopped being the forgiving kind of man I had spent 61 years trying to be. I did not go to that party and make a scene. I did not call my daughter screaming. I just sat there very still, and I made a decision that would take me about 8 months to carry out fully. What I am about to tell you is the story of every single thing I discovered after that day. Every lie that unraveled, every document I found, and exactly how a quiet, retired carpenter from a small lake town finally made sure that the people who treated his grief like an opportunity learned a lesson they will never be able to walk back. Before I go any further, I want to ask you something. If you found out that someone was laughing at you, using you, and treating everything your late spouse ever loved as their personal playground, what would you do first? Would you confront them immediately and risk losing everything? Or would you do what I did, which was go completely quiet, start paying very close attention and let them keep talking? Let me know in the comments, because the answer matters. And it is going to matter a lot more by the time this story is done. Stay with me, you need to hear all of it. My name is Roman. I am 62 years old and I spent 38 of those years married to a woman named Gloria. I want you to understand something about Gloria before I say anything else. She was not just my wife. She was the most deliberate person I have ever known. Everything she did on purpose. The way she kept a garden. The way she wrote letters by hand on actual paper when everyone else had gone to email. The way she bought that lake house in 1997 and spent the next 25 years making it into something that felt like it had always been there. Like the trees had grown around it because they chose to. Gloria was diagnosed with ovarian cancer in the spring of our 35th anniversary year. She fought for 3 years. I do not use the word fight loosely. She went to every appointment. She tried every option the doctors offered. She made decisions about her treatment with the same calm focus she brought to everything else. But she also, in those 3 years, did something I did not fully understand until much later. She spent a lot of time thinking about what she was going to leave behind. Not just for me, for our daughter, Patris, and for the future she had imagined for all of us at that lake house. Patris is our only child. She is 34 now. She has her mother's cheekbones, and I used to believe her mother's character. She married a man named Derek 6 years ago. Derek sells something related to software. I'm not entirely sure what, and when I have asked him to explain it over the years, he always makes it sound more complicated than it needs to be, which I have come to understand is a habit of people who are more concerned with appearing important than actually being useful. Derek wore expensive sneakers to my wife's funeral. I noticed, I said nothing. The lake house sits on about 2 acres at the northern edge of a reservoir about 40 minutes from the town where I grew up. It has a main house with 3 bedrooms, a screened porch that wraps around 2 sides, and a dock that stretches out over the water far enough that when you sit at the end of it on a summer evening, you feel like you are floating. There is also a smaller guest cabin about 60 yards from the main house that Gloria renovated in 2019, the year after her diagnosis, because she wanted a place where Patris and Derek could stay when they visited so that everyone had their own space and the visits could be long without anyone feeling crowded. She did that renovation for them. She spent $60,000 of her own savings on that cabin for them. I want you to remember that detail. When Gloria died, the lake house did not automatically become anything other than what it already was ours. The house was in both our names, and when Gloria passed, it transferred fully to me. This is not a complicated legal fact. Gloria had a will written with an attorney updated twice during her illness. The will specified that the lake house went to me outright. There was a separate letter of wishes, not legally binding, in which Gloria expressed her hope that the property would eventually be passed to Patris when I was ready, or when I pass. A letter of wishes, not a deed, not a contract, a letter. Derek understood this, or he should have, because Patris told me later that she had walked him through the will herself after the funeral. But here's the thing about Derek that I did not fully appreciate until everything unraveled. Derek had a way of hearing only the parts of information that he found useful and quietly discarding the rest. He heard that Gloria wanted the house to eventually go to Patris. He quietly dropped the words eventually and when Roman is ready. In Derek's version of events, the lake house was already his future property, and he was simply being patient enough not to say so out loud. The party photo was sent to me by a man named Herb, who owns a property about half a mile up the shore and who had been friends with Gloria and me for over 20 years. Herb is not a gossip. He sent me that photo because he genuinely thought I knew about the gathering and had chosen not to come. His message said, "Thought you might want to see the kids enjoying the place. Looked like a real crowd over there this weekend. Hope you're holding up, Roman." I called Herb back and I asked him a few careful questions. He told me what he had seen over the previous few weeks. Derek and Patris had been at the house 3 weekends in a row. The last weekend there had been a lot of people. Cars parked along the road, music until late, a bonfire on the shore, someone had used the kayaks. Someone had used the paddleboard that Gloria bought the summer before she got sick. Herb said he had waved from his dock and Derek had waved back, friendly as you please, like the man of the property. I thanked Herb and I hung up the phone and I sat very still for a while. I am not a man who cries easily, but I will tell you honestly that I was not entirely dry-eyed thinking about strangers on Gloria's paddleboard. I thought about the specific afternoon she bought that paddleboard. We had driven to a sporting goods store 2 towns over because she had read an article about how being on the water was good for the mind during treatment. She stood in that store for 20 minutes deciding between 2 boards. She picked the red one because she said it would be easy to see from the porch if she left it out by the water. She used it exactly 4 times before she got too tired. I had moved it to the shed the October before she died, and I had not touched it since. I did not call Patris that day. I did not call Derek. I sat with what I knew and I thought about my next steps the way I used to think about a complicated piece of woodwork. What is the grain telling me? Where are the stress points? And what is the right tool for this particular problem? What I decided that afternoon in Herb's driveway was that I needed more information before I did anything at all. So I went home. And I started paying attention in a way I had never paid attention before. The first thing I did was drive out to the lake house myself the following Thursday. I had not been back since the week after the funeral when I had gone to close up the main house for winter. What I found when I arrived stopped me at the door of the main house for a solid minute. The place had been opened up and lived in. There were dishes in the drying rack. There was food in the refrigerator. There were towels hung up in the bathroom that did not belong to me. Someone had rearranged the furniture in the living room. The big armchair that had been Gloria's, the one she used to sit in facing the window so she could watch the water, had been moved to the corner and replaced at the window by a newer, larger recliner that I had never seen before in my life. I stood in front of that corner where Gloria's chair had been moved and I felt something shift inside me. It was not rage exactly. It was something colder than rage. It was the feeling of something becoming very clear. I walked through the whole house slowly. I opened every drawer. I looked in every closet. The guest cabin, the one Gloria had built for Patris and Derek, had clearly become their base of operations, but the main house had also been claimed. There were Derek's golf shirts hanging in the closet of the master bedroom. There were Patris's products on the bathroom counter. There was a framed photo on the bookshelf that I did not recognize Derek and Patris, and a group of friends at what looked like a rooftop bar, clearly not taken at the lake house but placed there as if marking territory. I took photographs of all of it, not because I was angry but because I am a methodical man and I had already decided that if this situation was going to require documentation, I was going to have documentation. I photographed the moved furniture, the foreign recliner, the golf shirts, the bathroom products, the unfamiliar photo, the full refrigerator, the towels. I sent all of it to myself by email with the date in the subject line. Then I locked up the house, got in my truck, and drove home. The next thing I did was call my attorney. I want to be clear about something here. I did not call her because I was ready to take action. I called her because I am the kind of man who believes in knowing exactly where he stands before he opens his mouth. Her name is Margaret and she has handled my family's legal matters for about 15 years. I laid out the situation for her and I asked her a simple question. What are my rights here? Her answer was simple and clean. The house is in your name alone, Roman. You can ask them to leave. You can change the locks at any time. You owe no one access. If they claim any right to the property, they are wrong. The letter of wishes in Gloria's estate carries no legal weight. It is a statement of hope, not an instrument of law. I thanked Margaret and I told her I was not ready to act yet. She told me that was fine and to call her when I was. That conversation gave me something important, not just legal clarity, but a kind of settled calm. I was not the one in the wrong position here. I was not overreacting. The facts were simple and they were entirely on my side. What happened over the next 2 months was a slow accumulation of information that built piece by piece into something much larger and much darker than a son-in-law using a lake house without permission. It started with a phone call from my neighbor Margaret, not my attorney, a different Margaret, my neighbor 2 houses down who knew Gloria from her garden club. This Margaret called me one afternoon to ask if I had rented out the lake house because she had seen a listing online. I asked her to send me the link. She did, and there it was. The lake house, my lake house, Gloria's lake house, was listed on a short-term rental platform under a profile that belonged to Derek. He had listed it as a 3-bedroom lakefront property with private dock, renovated guest cabin, kayaks, and paddleboard included. The nightly rate was $320. The listing had been active for 6 weeks. It had 41 reviews, 41. Which meant the listing had been up and operating for much longer than 6 weeks. The reviews going back further had been moved to a newer listing, a trick some hosts use when they rebuild a profile. I found the older listing with a bit of searching. That one had been active for 14 months. 14 months, Gloria had been gone for just under 15 months at that point. I sat with that number for a long time. 1 month after Gloria died, Derek had listed her home on a rental platform and had been collecting money on it ever since. The guest cabin alone, the one Gloria had spent $60,000 building for her daughter and son-in-law, was listed separately as an add-on, available for an additional $90 a night. In 14 months of partial year operation, assuming a conservative occupancy rate, I calculated that Derek had made somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 from my wife's property. Money that had gone entirely to him. Money I had never seen, never been told about, never been asked about. I forwarded both listing links to myself in the same email thread I had started with the photographs. Then I called my attorney again. Margaret was quiet for a moment after I explained what I had found. Then she said, "Roman, he has been profiting from your property without your knowledge or consent. That is not a gray area." I told her I still was not ready to act. She told me she understood, but that I should stop letting this breathe any longer than necessary, because every day the listing was active was another day of unauthorized use. I told her I was going to need just a little more time. There was something I still did not fully understand, and it had to do with Patris. Patris knew, that was the part I was wrestling with. I kept asking myself whether it was possible that she did not know her husband was running a rental business out of her mother's lake house. The more I thought about it, the more I kept landing on the same answer. No, Patris was too smart not to know. The question was how much she knew, and whether she had come to believe, the way Derek seemed to believe, that the house was already theirs in some meaningful sense, and that what Derek was doing was simply good financial management of a future asset. I decided to have dinner with Patris, just the two of us know Derek, at a restaurant in town. I did not tell her why I wanted to meet, I just said I missed her and wanted to have a meal together. She agreed easily, she showed up looking well. We ordered food and we talked about ordinary things for a while, and then I watched her face very carefully as I said, "I drove out to the lake house a few weeks ago." She paused. She kept her expression neutral. She said, "Oh yeah, how was it?" I said, "Different from how I remembered. Someone had rearranged the furniture." She picked up her water glass and took a sip and said, "We have been going out there on some weekends just to keep an eye on the place, make sure it does not get musty." I said, "That makes sense. Is Derek doing anything else with the house?" She looked at me for a moment that was just a beat too long. Then she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean, is there any other use of the property that I should know about?" She said, "Not really." I nodded. I changed the subject. She relaxed visibly. "I want you to notice what I did not do. I did not pull out my phone and show her the rental listing. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse her of anything. I filed what I had seen." That pause, that too long beat, that "not really," and I carried it home with me. The next piece of the story came from a completely unexpected direction. It came from Derek's brother, a man named Kyle who I had met maybe 5 times total at family events over the years. Kyle called me out of the blue on a Tuesday morning in what was now about 4 months after the pool party photo. He started the call awkwardly with a lot of small talk, and I let him go through it because I could hear that he was building up to something. Eventually he said, "Roman, I want to ask you something and I want you to know I am not trying to make trouble." I said, "Go ahead, Kyle." He said, "Has Derek talked to you about the house?" I said, "Not in any detail." Kyle was quiet for a second, then he said, "He has been telling people in the family that you signed something, that you gave them the house. He said there is a document." I asked Kyle what kind of document. He said, "I do not know." He said he showed it to our mother once at a dinner. She thought it was the deed or something like it. I told her to ask him more about it, but she did not want to make waves. I thanked Kyle and I asked him if he remembered anything else about what the document looked like. He said it was folded like a letter. Blue paper. I knew immediately what it was. Gloria had written her letter of wishes on blue stationery. She had a whole box of it that she had bought in Paris on a trip we took when Patris was in high school. She used that paper for things that mattered to her. Her letter of wishes had been written on that paper. It had been written by hand, addressed to Patris, and given to Patris directly by Gloria in the last weeks of her life. It said, in Gloria's own words, that it was her hope and her wish, though not her legal instruction, that the lake house would one day belong to Patris, and that she hoped Roman and Patris would make that decision together when the time felt right. Derek was showing that letter to his family and describing it as a document in which I had signed over the house. He was presenting Gloria's handwritten letter of wishes, a personal, non-binding, deeply intimate letter from a dying woman to her daughter, as a legal transfer of property. And based on what Kyle had told me, at least some of his family believed it. I called Margaret, my attorney, the same day. I told her what Kyle had said. She told me that what Derek was doing by misrepresenting that letter was legally significant, particularly in combination with the unauthorized rental income. She said we needed to have a serious conversation about next steps. I told her I agreed, but I asked her for 3 more weeks, because I had one more piece of information I was waiting on and I wanted everything in place before I moved. The last piece came through Herb. Good old Herb, who had sent me the original photo. Herb told me that Derek had approached him about a month earlier to ask if Herb would be interested in a shared dock arrangement. Derek had told Herb that he and Patris were planning to build a second dock and expand the existing one, and that he was looking at the costs. Herb, who is no fool and who knew the situation, had played along and asked Derek what the timeline was. Derek had said he was hoping to get started in the spring as soon as he got the last of the permits sorted. He had been specific. He had talked about the permits as though he had already applied for them. Herb asked him whose name was on the permit application. Derek had said, well, it will be in our names once we get the title transferred. Herb said, and when is that happening? Derek said, soon. My father-in-law is being a little slow about it, but we are working on it. Working on it? I had never had a single conversation with Derek about any property transfer. Not one. He had never asked me. He had never sent me a letter, an email, a text, or a request of any kind regarding the ownership of the lake house. He had simply decided somewhere in his own mind that the house was going to be his, and had begun operating accordingly, renting it, furnishing it, planning construction on it, and telling his family that legal documents existed to prove it. I had everything I needed. I called Margaret the next morning and I told her it was time. What happened next took about 3 weeks to put into motion and about 45 minutes to execute. Margaret drafted a formal cease and desist letter directed at Derek and Patris, requiring them to immediately remove the property from all rental platforms, provide a full accounting of all rental income received, and vacate any personal belongings from the main house and guest cabin within 30 days. The letter outlined the legal basis in clear and unambiguous terms. The property was owned solely by Roman. There had been no legal transfer of any kind. The letter of wishes carried no legal authority, and the unauthorized rental of the property constituted use of another person's asset for financial gain without consent. Margaret also drafted a second document, a formal demand for an accounting of all funds received from rental activity, with the notation that those funds may have been collected in violation of property law and that the matter was being reviewed to determine whether further legal action was appropriate. Before those letters were sent, I did one more thing. I drove to the lake house on a Saturday morning when I knew Derek and Patris were there because Herb had told me he had seen their car the night before. I let myself in with my key. Derek was in the kitchen making coffee and he froze when he saw me. Patris came in from the porch and her face went through several expressions very quickly. I said good morning to both of them. I sat down at the kitchen table. I asked Derek how things were going. He said fine, relaxed a little, offered me coffee. I accepted. We sat together at the kitchen table in Gloria's house and I drank coffee and we talked about the weather and the lake and I watched him and I thought, this man has no idea. After about 15 minutes I stood up. I told them I was glad the house was being looked after. I told them I was planning to spend more time there in the coming months. I told them I wanted to make some changes to the property and I was starting to work through the details. Derek nodded comfortably and said that sounded great and that he was happy to help with any of the planning. I said I appreciated that. I said I might take him up on it. I shook his hand. I hugged Patris. I drove home. The letters arrived by certified mail 3 days later. I want to tell you what happened when those letters arrived because the response told me everything I needed to know about who I was dealing with. Derek called me within an hour of the delivery confirmation. His voice was not angry. It was controlled but shaking just beneath the surface. He said, Roman, I think there has been a misunderstanding. I let him talk. He said that he and Patris had been caring for the property in good faith. He said that the rental income had been used to maintain the house, pay the utility bills, and keep the dock in good repair. He said he thought I knew about it. He said he assumed I had given my blessing through Patris. He said he was sorry if there had been any confusion. Every sentence was a deflection. Every sentence moved the responsibility somewhere else. Caring for the property in good faith, that was not caring for a property that was running a business on it. Rental income for maintenance. The maintenance bills for that house ran about $4,000 a year. He had collected between $20,000 and $40,000. The math was not close. He assumed I knew through Patris. He had never asked Patris to ask me. I knew that because I had asked Patris directly at dinner and she had confirmed through her evasiveness that I had not been consulted. And then there was the beautiful phrase, if there had been any confusion. No, there had been no confusion. There had been a scheme run quietly and confidently by a man who had decided my grief made me an easy mark. I let Derek finish. I did not interrupt him once. When he was done I said, Derek, I appreciate you calling. My attorney will be in touch, and I ended the call. He called back twice. I did not answer. He texted once. I did not reply. Patris called that evening and I did answer because she is my daughter. She was upset. She was not angry at me or not entirely. She was upset in the way a person is when they realize they are standing in the middle of a situation they cannot control and the walls are moving. She said, Dad, Derek says this is all a misunderstanding. He was just trying to help manage things. I said, Patris, I need you to understand something. This is not about anger. It is about the fact that your husband has been collecting money from my property for over a year without my knowledge or consent and without sharing a single dollar of it with me. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, he told me it was going toward the house. I said, do you know how much he collected? She said no. I told her the range. She was quiet again longer this time. I said, I am not trying to hurt your marriage, Patris, but I need you to think carefully about what you knew and what you chose not to ask about. She said she needed some time. I said I understood. I told her I loved her and I ended the call. The formal accounting that Derek eventually produced under legal pressure showed that over 14 months he had collected $31,400 in rental income from the lake house. He had paid approximately $5,800 toward verifiable property-related expenses, utilities, a plumber's visit, some dock boards. The remaining $25,600 he had not spent on the house. His attorney argued that the remainder had been used for general family expenses, which is legal jargon for. He spent it on himself and his life, and he did not tell his wife's father, who owned the property, that any of it existed. I instructed Margaret to pursue full recovery of the net unauthorized income. I was not doing this as revenge. I was doing this because it was correct. If a stranger had broken into a vacation property and rented it out and collected money from it, we would call that what it was. The fact that Derek had a key I had never formally given him, a key that had been on Patris's ring since her mother was alive, did not change the fundamental nature of what he had done. The 30 days in the cease and desist letter came and went. Derek and Patris removed the listing. They did not, however, fully vacate their belongings. There were still items in the main house, some furniture they had added, some personal items, the recliner that had replaced Gloria's chair. I gave them a 2-week extension out of consideration for Patris. At the end of those 2 weeks, everything that was not mine was gone. The recliner disappeared. The golf shirts disappeared. The unfamiliar photo on the bookshelf disappeared. I moved Gloria's chair back to the window. I stood behind it for a moment with my hands on the back of it, and I took a long breath. The settlement, when it was reached, required Derek and Patris to repay me $22,000 over 18 months. Their attorney negotiated from the full amount, and Margaret and I agreed because a clean resolution that Patris could also live with was worth more to me than the last $3,000. The lake house rental listing was permanently removed. A formal letter was included in the settlement acknowledging that the property was owned solely by Roman, and that no letter, document, or oral agreement had ever constituted a legal transfer of any interest in the property to either Derek or Patris. I had that last paragraph framed, not to be cruel, not to display it anywhere. I had it framed and I put it in the drawer of Gloria's old writing desk in the master bedroom because I thought Gloria, who believed in the precise meaning of words and the power of a document, would have appreciated the clarity of it. Let me tell you what happened to Derek and Patris after that, because this is not a story where everything goes back to normal and everyone lives happily. It is a story where things change and then settle into a new shape, and the new shape is not the one anyone planned. Derek and Patris separated 8 months after the settlement. I do not know all the details, and it is not my place to share what I do know. What I will say is that Patris told me on a phone call about 6 months after the legal matter was closed that she had done a lot of thinking about what she had chosen not to ask about. She did not blame me. She was clear about that. She said, I think I knew something was off, Dad, and I let Derek's explanations be enough because it was easier. I told her I understood. I told her that part of loving someone is sometimes letting their certainty substitute for our own questions. I told her that I had done that in my own life and I was not in any position to judge. That conversation was the most honest one Patris and I had ever had as adults. We have had more of them since. She is doing well. She is figuring out who she is without Derek's version of the future mapped out for her. I think she is going to be all right. I think she is more like her mother than she knew. As for the lake house, I spent the following summer there, much of it alone, and it was one of the better summers of my life. I fixed the dock boards that needed fixing. I repainted the screen porch. I put Gloria's chair back in its exact spot and I watched the water from it most evenings. Herb came over for dinner twice. A few old friends visited. I found Gloria's paddleboard in the shed in early June and I brought it down to the water and I stood on it and I paddled out to the middle of the cove. And I sat there for a while just floating, the way she had always wanted to. I want to tell you about one specific evening near the end of that summer because it feels like the right way to bring this story to a close. Tea was a Tuesday in late August, warm but with the first suggestion of fall in the air, that particular smell the lake gets when the seasons begin to turn. I was sitting at the end of the dock watching the sun go down. My phone was inside. The water was completely still. There were 2 loons out on the far side of the cove and they were calling to each other in that sound they make, that sound that is like nothing else in the world. I thought about Gloria. I thought about how she bought this place because she believed there should be somewhere in every life that exists purely for peace. I thought about how she had renovated that guest cabin with her own savings, out of pure love for her daughter, and how that love had been turned into a line item in someone else's business plan. I thought about the 41 reviews and the $320 a night and the blue letter being shown around to strangers as proof of ownership. I thought about Derek's voice on the phone, all that careful deflection, all that smooth management of blame. And then I thought about sitting in my truck in Herb's driveway on that first day, staring at the photo of strangers on my wife's dock, and I thought about the decision I made. Stay quiet, pay attention, let the truth gather itself, use documents, not drama, let the facts speak, trust the process and not the rage. I am not going to tell you that what Derek did not hurt. It hurt in a very specific way, not just because of the money, though $25,000 is not nothing, and not just because of the disrespect, though the disrespect was breathtaking in its confidence. It hurt because of the timing. Because 11 days after I put my wife in the ground, someone who had sat at her table and called her his family had already decided that her most beloved place was now an asset to be managed. The grief had not even had time to settle, and the calculation was already running. But I will also tell you this, the way it ended gave me something I did not expect. It gave me the house back, not just legally, but emotionally. For a long time after Gloria died, I could not really be there without feeling hollowed out. The thought of the lake house made me think of endings. After everything that happened with Derek, after the documents and the letters and the settlement and the slow clearing out of all his things, the house became mine again in a different way. It became something I had fought for, something I had protected, something I owed it to Gloria to protect, and that changed how it felt to be there. I am going to the lake house next weekend. Patris is coming, just the two of us for the first time and I cannot remember how many years. She's going to sleep in the guest cabin her mother built for her. I am going to make breakfast on Saturday morning and we are going to eat it on the screen porch and watch the water. I am going to let her talk about whatever she needs to talk about. I am going to try to tell her some things about her mother that I have been holding on to, things she probably does not know, things I think she is ready to hear now. If Gloria is anywhere, she is at that lake. And if she is at that lake, I think she already knows how this ended, and I think she is not surprised that it ended this way. Gloria always said I was a slow man to anger but a thorough one. She said it like it was one of the things she loved about me. I hope she was right. I hope she is watching the loons from that dock and thinking, Roman finally figured it out. It only took him 8 months and one very good attorney. That is my story, all of it. The pool party photo and the blue stationery and the 41 reviews and the accounting and the cease and desist letters and the settlement and the summer I spent putting everything back the way it was supposed to be. I am 62 years old and I spent 38 years learning from the most deliberate woman I ever knew, and when it mattered, I tried to do it her way. Quietly, carefully, with the right documents in hand. The lake house is still standing, Gloria's chair is still at the window, the paddleboard is red and easy to see from the porch, and it is mine. If this story reached something inside you, I want to hear from you in the comments, not just whether you liked it but what it made you feel. Was there a moment where you thought Roman should have spoken up sooner, or do you think the patience was exactly right? Some people will hear this story and say the real betrayal was Derek's. Some will say the harder truth is that Patris looked away. Some will say Gloria's letter should never have been handed to someone like Derek in the first place. All of those answers might be true at the same time. Grief makes people show you who they really are and what they think they are owed. Tell me in the comments what you would have done differently. And if you have lived through something like this yourself, tell me that too. Those stories matter, every one of them.